I was not able to, due to my low emotional intelligence, I was not able to separate my emotion from my identity. If I was feeling angry, then I am angry, and my behaviors, my actions, everything would reflect that I am angry. And then again, one day Kathy's like, no, but do you realize that you can behave in a way, in a manner that is different than how you're feeling? And I'm like, no, you can't. That's impossible. She's like, no, actually, that's not impossible. And you just because it's okay to feel angry. She's like, it's okay to feel angry. You just don't have to. Your identity does not have to be anger. And how you express yourself, you can choose to behave differently than your anger. And I just remember when she told me that, I was like, man, you just blew my mind. Because again, for the previous 4 decades, I had never even considered that was a possibility or an option, that I could behave differently than how I was feeling. Again, because of my low emotional intelligence and my immaturity. I just did not even know that was a thing, that was even possible.
Welcome to the EQ for Entrepreneurs podcast. Like most business owners, you already know you need good business and marketing strategies to scale and be profitable. But at some point, you've hit the dreaded wall where you feel stuck and frustrated. EQ for Entrepreneurs is for business owners and leaders who are honest enough to admit that they just might be the ones holding their business back and are brave enough to change that.
We're Noble and Kathy, and every week we're having candid conversations about all things emotional intelligence and how growing that has allowed us to get out of our own way and is radically transforming both our businesses and our personal lives. This is the secret sauce strategy for modern entrepreneurs who are tired of hustling without seeing results and want to grow a business and a life that they love.
Entrepreneurs, leaders, and influencers, welcome to today's episode. This is part 2 of the last episode, where the title, I feel terrible and I'm okay with it. Just had a conversation with Kathy, who gave me some insights that I was missing in the previous episode that is really helpful for me personally, and hopefully this is going to be helpful for you all as well. The missing piece that I did not think about last episode was when you are feeling unpleasant emotions. Again, my tendency, again, that last episode, man, I was feeling very low energy. You could probably hear it in the podcast episode. And I wasn't feeling good. I wasn't feeling pleasant. I was feeling a number of different unpleasant emotions. I think it was disheartened, discouraged, maybe disappointed. I don't know. There was a lot of disses in there that I was feeling. And and I could not think through or elaborate because I was externally processing, which is also helpful, by the way, just to know, are you an external processor or an internal processor? And for me, I'm an external processor. So because that was happening real time, me experiencing those emotions and me doing the podcast, I had not thought through the intricacies of that experience for me. And I had not thought through or thought of or could not accurately express the concept between intentionally allowing yourself to feel unpleasant emotions and stewing. For me personally, there's a difference. One is productive, one is unproductive and unhealthy and even toxic. And for my whole life, prior to a few years ago, I would do the stewing. I would stew. I would just sit there and spin and allow my stewing of an emotion or multiple emotions to just take me down this spiral, even worse and worse and worse. And I think a couple intricacies about this stewing is number one, so in the past, what I would do for most of my life, the stewing was I would never identify the emotions I was feeling. Well, am I feeling disappointed? Am I feeling disheartened? Am I feeling discouraged? Am I feeling upset or frustrated or angry or sad or rejected? Or I didn't do that little exercise. I didn't identify what emotions I was feeling. I just was sitting in all these unpleasant emotions without identifying them, and therefore without actually processing them or thinking about them or evaluating them or even being curious about them. I would just sit in those, unpleasant emotions, and again, allow myself to just, okay. And then all these stories would come along with these emotions, and I would just attach to one story, and then I would attach to another story, and I would attach to another story, and allow all those unpleasant emotions and corresponding stories, although most of the time being inaccurate, to become almost my identity. And I am angry. So I'm feeling not just, so you see the difference, right? I'm not just feeling angry, I am angry. That second one is like my identity. And I don't think that's healthy or productive. In fact, I think it's toxic to allow a feeling or emotion to become your identity. And again, this was back when, again, not that long ago, again, 4 or 5 years ago, the two are one and the same. I was not able to, due to my low emotional intelligence, I was not able to separate my emotion from my identity. If I was feeling angry, then I am angry, and my behaviors, my actions, everything would reflect that I am angry. And then again, one day Kathy's like, no, but do you realize that you can behave in a way, in a manner that is different than how you're feeling? And I'm like, no, you can't. That's impossible. She's like, no, actually, that's not impossible. And you just because it's okay to feel angry. She's like, it's okay to feel angry. You just don't have to. Your identity does not have to be anger. And how you express yourself, you can choose to behave differently than your anger. And I just remember when she told me that, I was like, man, you just blew my mind. Because again, for the previous 4 decades, I had never even considered that was a possibility or an option, that I could behave differently than how I was feeling. Again, because of my low emotional intelligence and my immaturity, I just did not even know that was a thing, that was even possible. Here's another analogy that I thought of that I feel God gave me this morning that is very helpful, I think, in a way, a healthy, productive way to look at handling or dealing with unpleasant emotions. It's like imagine if you have a guest, maybe a friend that shows up unannounced to your house. They show up unannounced to your house. Now, you've got multiple options. You can choose to not let them in the house. You can choose to not even open the door to the house. You can choose to open the door and see which friend it is and say, oh, hey, this is Frank. This is Tim. This is Susie. This is Francis, whatever. And then you can choose to at that engage them a little bit and then turn them around. Right? Hey, sorry, I'm busy. Don't have time to chat today. See ya. You can invite them in, and you can spend time with them. You can be curious about them. You can ask them questions. You can serve them some tea or serve them some coffees. You can serve them some tacos, but you don't have to let them spend the night. You don't have to let them move in to your house. And so your emotions are kind of like that. Sometimes they sometimes I think, man, all the time, right? They show up unannounced. And even the friends, the emotions that you may not be homies with, or you may not be super comfortable with, does not mean you have to turn them away at the door. Does not mean that you can't let them in. Does not mean that you cannot be curious about them. So that was a huge analogy. That whole emotions, pleasant and unpleasant, are like uninvited guests or friends that knock on your door and just keep knocking until you open the door. And that's the thing, is if you don't, this is again my problem for most of my life, is I just let them knock, and then more friends would show up, more guests, uninvited guests would show up, and now they're pounding on the multiple emotions, multiple uninvited guests are just pounding on the door of my mind and my heart. And I never open the door. I just let them pound. And that at some point is going to kind of drive you nuts. And again, that's not healthy. So at a minimum, I think from an emotionally healthy perspective, and again, we're not psychologists, we're not psychiatrists, we're not counselors or therapists, but from my perspective, from my personal experience, the healthy thing to do at a minimum is to open the door and identify who they are. What are their names? And maybe some of them, again, like me, when I was super emotionally immature, hey, what's your name? Well, my name is disheartened. Okay, well, man, I don't even know what is disheartened. Well, man, tell me about yourself, disheartened. I don't know that I've ever met you before. And if I have met you before, I don't remember meeting you. Can you tell me about yourself? And learn about them. Ask them questions. I am disappointed. Okay, well, tell me about yourself. I don't know. I'm sure I've met you before, but I don't remember meeting you. Maybe can you give me some experiences that when I've met you before, tell me about yourself, right? Have a curious mind about your emotions. And again, invite them in. They don't have to stay for 4 hours. They don't have to stay overnight. They don't have to move in. But hey, I've got 15, 20 minutes. Let's chat. Or maybe because sometimes your emotions can hit you in the middle of the day. Maybe you're at work. Maybe you're spending time with a friend, and emotions from 5-10 years ago from some other experience just hit you in the middle of your conversation with this other friend. Well, boom, you take a quick pause. Okay, emotion of anger, or emotion of frustration, or emotion of elation. Maybe it's a pleasant emotion. Hey, I see you knocking at the door. Thanks a million for coming over. I can't talk right now, but if you come back in a few hours when I'm at home or in the evening, I'll be able to have a conversation with you and spend some time with you. So you acknowledge it, but that moment is not the practical time to sit and have that discussion with that particular emotion or friend, for example. So for me, okay, the other thing is when that friend, that emotion stops by to your house and knocks on the door, and you open the door and you say, hey, great to see you. What's your name? Oh, well, I'm anger, or I'm, again, whatever the thing is, excited, or whatever that emotion is. The other thing that I did not recognize the difference between stewing and allowing myself permission to feel or talk to that particular emotion, and that's judgment. Before, I would add, again, stories, because a lot of times these emotions have stories attached to these emotions, and they have beliefs attached to these emotions, and in some cases, they have judgment attached to these emotions. So again, what I would do is I would just let them stand at the door and pound on the door of my heart and mind, and I would just stew. And I could tell, oh man, they're knocking really loudly. They're banging on my door. I'm just not even the story would be, I know they're bad guys. I know it's bad guys trying to get into my house, and I'm not going to let them in because they're going to tell me that I'm terrible, I'm a loser, I'm worthless, right? All my stories would kick in. before I even opened the door, before I even saw who they were. And so I would start judging these friends, these guests at the door without even, I don't even know who they are. I didn't even open the door yet. And I've already started to attach judgment and negative stories, inaccurate stories to these guests at the door of my mental and emotional house, and without even acknowledging again who they were. So that's another massive piece of this is be very curious about not just, so again, open the door, acknowledge who they are, what are their names of the different emotions, of the different guests that showed up to your house. And again, if you have time to let them in now and have a conversation with them with each separate emotion individually, great, do that. If you have to schedule it for another time, hey guys, can you guys come back in 15 minutes or come back in a couple of days? I've got some time allotted and we'll have this chat. And now, so be curious, be very intentional about being curious, asking them questions, but be careful to attach judgment and inaccurate stories and harmful, unproductive beliefs to those emotions that have come to hang out with you for a little bit. Because here's the other thing too, and this analogy is so huge, y'all. And if you are listening to this, man, I am going to be using this probably from now on, from every podcast going forward. I am probably going to use this analogy because it is so powerful for me. For me now, just, I'm so thankful that God gave this to me today, just talking to Kathy about this whole concept between stewing and giving yourself permission to feel. One's unhealthy, toxic, unproductive. One is healthy, productive. And it's healthy and productive. Is seeing emotions as guests. Some are pleasant guests, some are unpleasant guests, but they all need to be addressed and identified, because if you don't, again, one thing I say in a lot of the different episodes recently, unaddressed emotional issues will not get better over time. They actually compound. So again, using this analogy, so that insight attached to this analogy, those guests, pleasant and unpleasant, standing at the door. So in this case, we'll just use unpleasant for the analogy. Will just stand there at the door and continue to pound that door of your emotions and your heart and your mind. And a lot of times, if you just allow them to stand at that door, just pounding on that door, they're gonna that particular emotion, that particular guest is gonna probably invite a couple other guests that are related to that particular emotion. So they'll bring their cousins that are related. So what was initially just maybe small frustration, if you just allow them to stand there and pound on the door of your mind and your heart and your emotions, that's going to turn into, that little frustration is going to turn into anger, which could turn into bitterness, which could turn into resentment, which could turn, right? So now all these other of their cousins are showing up at your door. They just want to be acknowledged. They just want to be addressed, that they're there. And so that's the first step, is addressing them. Hey, who are you? I don't recognize you. I don't recognize you. Hey, I recognize you. Man, I've spent some time with you before. Man, I don't recognize you. Hey, come in and let's have a conversation. So the first step is identifying who they are. But that next step is having a conversation with those emotions, with those feelings, and really, again, not again, and it's a great analogy. Like you're having afternoon coffee with homies at the coffee shop, at your local coffee shop. So there's no judgment. It doesn't have to be associated with a ton of anxiety and pressure and all this stuff. Just, I love that analogy of like, no, you're at a coffee shop, you're hanging out, man. Okay. So anger. Okay, man, which is a secondary emotion, by the way. Okay. Anger. Hey man, I've met you before. I've definitely spent some time with you before throughout my life. but this is maybe a new scenario or a new experience with you, anger. Can you tell me about yourself? Why are you here? What's going on? Why are you feeling this way? Where did the anger? Hey, where'd you come from, anger? Did you stop by sadness before you came by? Did you stop by rejection before you came by? Did you stop by disappointment before you came by? Because again, anger is that secondary emotion. So they typically are, anger is typically attached to another emotion. They came from another emotion. Anger came from another emotion. So anyway, this is interesting. Personalizing these emotions, as a guest or a friend, maybe a pleasant or unpleasant friend, is super helpful for me to think about this. Maybe it's not going to be helpful for you, but man, this is powerful for me to think through my emotions as guests, uninvited guests, which sometimes can be a surprise, which sometimes can be unpleasant, just the fact that it's a surprise. But I think this is the difference between stewing, where you just let them stand at the door and pound at your door, versus opening the door, identifying who they are, allowing them to come in, having a conversation with them, spend some time with them, be curious about them, ask them questions. Where did you come from? What are the stories that are attached? What are the beliefs that are attached? And suspending judgment. Feelings and emotions can carry some very inaccurate stories and very maybe inaccurate beliefs that are not based on truth. So anyway, just pay attention to that, be aware of that. But man, I'm so excited. This is massive, y'all, massive. And again, thank you all so much again for being a part of this journey with us. For those of y'all that are watching our YouTube channel, thank you. For those of y'all that are listening to our podcast, thank you. For those of y'all that have reached out and said you want to take that scientific emotional assessment, which comes with a 1-hour conversation with me to discuss your assessment, your results. For those of you all that either have taken or are interested in taking our EQ course, our EQ Accelerator course. So that with the assessment, the scientific assessment, you can find that at eqforentrepreneurs.com/training. You can learn more about that there. If you would like training for your organization or your company or coaching yourself, same thing, eqforentrepreneurs.com/training. If you would like to get more information or get on the wait list for our 8-week course, Teaching Emotional Intelligence, you can go to eqforentrepreneurs.com/EQA, eqforentrepreneurs.com/EQA. And again, remember, unaddressed emotional issues do not get better over time. They actually compound. And that analogy that I shared today totally makes it even more real and makes more sense to me now. That quote, that insight. And also remember that emotionally healthy people help heal other people emotionally. Because, and this is again, use that analogy, when you open up that door and you see all these different emotions there, all these different guests there, if you look out, I bet you, and look across the street at your neighbors' houses and your friends' houses and your family's houses, they probably have a ton of emotions that are standing at their doors, just pounding, not getting addressed, no one is coming to the door and letting them in, which is causing so much frustration and anxiety in your friends' lives and your family's lives. And this is huge too. And I guarantee you, again, like me, for example, some of their emotions that are pounding at their doors have been there since they were children, that have never been addressed. Some of those emotions are old, that have been there for many, 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 many years in some cases. So, man, this is huge breakthrough for me, y'all. I'd love to hear from you. And again, if you feel like this episode is helpful, please share it with friends. Rate our podcast. We'd love it if you would rate our podcast. Leave us a comment. Thank you for sharing your own growth journeys with us.